And we are live. What's up, y'all? We got episode 24, the Kobe episode of Catch and Counter. As always, I got Nibs and I got Dakota with me. So, I've been a bit under the weather this week. I know Dakota's been a bit under the weather too, but the thing we were saying is the least we can do is if Tszyu was able to fight 12 rounds with that cut he had on the top of his head, the least we can do is give y'all about an hour, give or take a few minutes here and there about last week and then what we got coming up this week. So, Tszyu Sebastian Fundora was the big fight, the big pay-per-view, the opening for Amazon Prime. So, Nibs, wherever you kind of want to take this, whether you want to go to the cut or you want to go to the fight, just kind of give some of the thoughts you had on the main event that we had this past Saturday night between Tszyu and Sebastian Fundora.
First off, welcome back, fellas. It's always a pleasure to work with you. You know what I'm saying? Got nothing but love and respect for the fan. All right, now that we done got all that mushy shit out the way, look here, man. Tim Tszyu was on his way to completely embarrass Sebastian Fundora until he got that cut on his head and couldn't see for a damn. If you watch, it's like watching two completely different fights, bro. Like until that cut happened, which to Fundora's credit, wasn't his fault. That was a complete freak thing that happened. You know, you can't hold that against him. So you still got to fight, which Tim Tszyu did. To his credit, he didn't bitch up and say, "Okay, stop it. I can't see nothing." He did what a fighter does, and he fought the rest of the fight. It reminded me almost a little bit of a fight where Badu Jack had this like vicious cut in the middle of his forehead. They should have stopped that fight, you know, right after it happened, but he did what a fighter does. He carried on through. He ended up losing that fight. Same thing happened with Tszyu, bro. That fight was deep. It was in a bad area. It was going to bleed pretty much no matter what you did. Even Stitch Rand said that, who's like, the cut whisperer, right? He said there's really nothing you could have done. That shit was going to bleed like that all night. It made it almost impossible for Tim Tszyu to see properly, and it was a completely different thing. The only reason I believe Fundora won that fight is because of that cut. I think they should run it back. But again, you can't really hold it against him if he doesn't. But I will say this: Fundora did do something we haven't seen him do in a long or ever. Is he fought a big man's fight for once? He fought outside. Thank God, right? But how much easier is that when your opponent can't see you, right? So it's kind of a did he do that because of the cut, or was that the game plan going in and he actually stuck with it this time? So that was the one positive for me for Fundora. I was like, wait a minute, is he actually fighting like a tall man? Like you didn't see any infighting, you didn't see any, let me bang it out with this guy, because that probably would have put him on his ass. But it was entertaining. It was bloody. But hey, we talk about the Tim Tszyu cut. Fundora was bleeding from the nose, all night. It was. I'll be honest with you, I loved it. I was like, man, there's blood everywhere. Yes, I remember there was a moment. I forget which round it was. Maybe one of you guys will know. There were punches being thrown and blood got splattered on one of the cameras. Oh, that shit. Oh, I was like, yes. It was. Yeah, it was. But it was a good fight, and I mean, if you're Amazon, you couldn't have asked for a better fight to kick off your pay per view, experience, right? I mean, if you love blood and guts kind of fights, this was as good as it gets without there being, Sylvester Stallone involved. So it's one of those fights where I think Tim Tszyu should have won, or would have won if it wasn't for the cut. And I won't say should have. He lost that fight fair and square. But I think if they run it back and there's no cuts involved, he gets him out of there, in my opinion.
Well, I think that it's two things. There's no way you don't get a cut like that and it doesn't completely change the fight. Aside from the fact that it probably hurt like a bitch, aside from the fact that it's leaking in his eyes, aside from the fact that the cut man didn't really look prepared for an injury of that magnitude. I mean, he wasn't wearing gloves. He didn't have anything outside of like Vaseline and a t-shirt. And so Tim was coming out every round with blood dripping in his eyes. That was the craziest shit to me. Was it's like, at what point do you call this fight? Because if it was right above his eye and it was getting in his eye, they would have called it. So why is it different because it's on his hairline? I thought that part was crazy. And then Fundora almost at the same time, like breaking his nose and gushing blood from his nose and mouth. It was like the fight opened up in like an instant. It was fucking wild. That being said, I think when Fundora has gotten into brawls, it's often because he's initiated it. It's because that's the kind of fight he wanted. So I think the fact that he was able to maintain that style for the 10 rounds after the cut, I think that's a really impressive way to come out for the biggest fight of your career. So I think regardless, because he was also bleeding profusely, I think he has to get credit for that. But you still got to do a fucking rematch, because there really isn't, and if you just watch the first 2 rounds, you go, all right, I know where this fight is going. But that's why you fight the whole fight. That's also why in certain instances you got to do a rematch, and this is one of them.
It's almost like, when we were watching the Parker and Zhang fight, right? It was like after the first knockdown, you go, okay, I know what's happening here, right? It's almost the same thing without knockdowns. You know what I mean? And then the guy who loses doesn't lose because he doesn't do shit. He's losing because he can't see shit. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the same thing. I don't think Parker Zhang deserves a rematch with Parker. I definitely feel like Tszyu deserves. One, he's the champ. He was consensus champ. And let's face it, he was not just winning; he was dominating the fight to that head thing.
And by the way, there's also an argument that he won a close fight. I mean, it was a close kind of flip a coin fight, but if somebody has it 7-5 Tszyu, I can't get mad at that. I mean, he fought in spurts very well and was able to keep the fight really competitive, despite the fact that Fundora was using his jab really smart and keeping him blinded with it.
Yeah, so should we see a rematch? Most likely. Will we get one? We know the business of boxing don't always work out that way, but we got a few comments in here. Felix saying that Tim did that much damage in 2 rounds, and we got my coach Josh in the building too, throwing out my fight date out there. So your boy's been hard at work. I don't talk about it much on here, but been working very hard day by day, getting better every single day. So
no, I'm gonna jump in on your behalf real quick.
Yeah.
A lot of people talk it, and it's so different when you're doing it, and just knowing you as your friend and as a coworker of sorts, bro. I got so much respect for you really getting yourself ready that anybody who ever steps in that ring, even just to spar, knows what a challenge that is. So I'm rooting for you, brother. We're all really excited for you.
That's a fact. I appreciate it. Y'all know me. I don't like to talk about it. I like to be about it. May 25th, we are definitely going to be about it. Ain't no doubt about that. So what Felix saying is, here's another element that makes a rematch interesting to me. The fight had not changed the way it did. It would have ended early, but since it didn't, Fundora was able to find a game plan that worked. So I'll kind of give my take on the whole fight too, because I looked at it the same way y'all did, where first 2 rounds, because I bet my parlay did have Tim Tszyu by stoppage, and I thought we were well on the way to kind of getting that. Just the cut clearly changed everything, and I think that Tim Tszyu's corner kind of gambled a little bit, and they saw how the first 2 rounds went, and they thought, okay, it's real bad, but we're gonna get to him at some point, which ended up kind of not being the right choice. You never want to kind of factor those things in, and you should have stopped it in the 3rd round, I think, once the cut happened. And either way, I think once you got to the 4th round, you won the first 2 rounds pretty wide. You were landing a bunch of right hands. The right hand that broke Fundora's nose actually happened in the 1st round. Once you get through the 3rd and 4th rounds is when Fundora started to kind of get going. You can see Tszyu's trying to like block the jab, but then wipe his face because of the blood and then close the distance. Way too many things going on. Once you get it to 2 rounds to 2 after 4 rounds and it's not going your way, then you at least got to stop it then and say, okay, we can get a draw, go back to the drawing board, and then kind of have a rematch a few months later. So I think that the corner got kind of ahead of themselves and they thought it was going their way, and I think that's ended up what backfired. Tim Tszyu, even on the punch stats, was way ahead, was clearly just closing distance, and Fundora really had no answer until that blood started showing up. And as y'all said, as Nip said too, got to give Fundora credit too, because he changed his whole style. Yeah, obviously the blood was the main reason, but he finally did what people have been asking him to do, and Tim Tszyu kind of died a death by 1,000 jabs in those last kind of 10 rounds. Fundora was using his length. using his jab, and I think that he gets credit for that also. And I think that's something he's going to look to use going forward. But switching lanes now to a potential rematch, which I would love to see. I'm not sure if we will see it because I know the WBO did order a fight between Fundora and Terrence Crawford, who Crawford would be his mandatory. Problem is, it seems like Fundora's side, Samson Lukowitz, his promoter, they're not too interested in that fight, and they'd rather go the route of an Errol Spence fight in Dallas. That's the one that they've talked about. They've now talked about a rematch also. So we'll say, Nibs, to you, if the rematch isn't going to happen, would you be okay with an Errol Spence fighting a Sebastian Fundora, and let's say maybe a Tim Tszyu fighting Terrence Crawford for the vacant WBO, or what are your thoughts on what would happen if we don't get a rematch? Because I know we all want to see the rematch, but if it weren't going to happen, what are your thoughts on that?
First off, since somebody else mentioned it first, I'm gonna tell y'all something. That's my dog right there. 525 come, we ain't gonna say shit. It's about that business. A man gonna do it. It is what it is. Now, with that being said, y'all know what it is. That's another. We'll get to that at the end, but support you did that guy. All right. No, I don't want to see Spence jump the line because this ain't 160, it's 154. It's way deeper, and I think it kind of disrespects the guys that are actually earning the spot to get there because let's be real clear. There's a deep pool of dudes under Fundora, under Tim Tszyu that have earned a right to get at least a shot, right? At one of the two of them. And Fundora, I mean, let's face it, Fundora got his shot because, the other, somebody else fell out. Which it's not like, and he made the best of it. But what about the guy who didn't get the shot? You know what I mean? Like, we're just going to jump right over him. And I get it. We're most likely going to get Spence because it's money, right? We talk about this all the time. Money makes sense. This guy's, he's Errol fucking Spence, right? So he's probably going to get the opportunity, but that's not what I would do. I want to see the rematch. If the rematch doesn't get made, the guy who Fundora took the spot from should then get the spot, or and then I would be okay with the Spence if that couldn't be made. Like I think the Spence should be the third option, not the first option, in my opinion.
I mean, I just honestly don't feel like Spence should be an option at this point. If Crawford is the option, I'm okay with that because that's the best pound for pound fighter in boxing. So if he wants to step up and fight a champion at a higher weight, I think that should be encouraged. But outside of a rematch, like I'm not really trying to see Errol Spence, man. No disrespect to Errol Spence, I'm a fan, but you gotta show us something, after that kind of a loss that just shows that you're a live dog before you're moving up and you're getting the title, and there, like you said, Nibs, there's a lot of guys in the line already. I would much rather see Fundora rematch Erickson Lubin. I would much rather see Fundora and Jesus Ramos. I would much rather see Fundora rematch Brian Mendoza, or actually get a fight with Sergey Bohacek. Like, there's so many good fighters at 154 that the idea that Errol Spence would come off a beating and get that shot over all of those guys, like that would not sit well with me. I think there's a lot of fans that it wouldn't sit well with.
And y'all make great points, but I tell you what, I still would be excited for that fight between Spence and Fundora. Even if, like I said, he will be skipping the line. We get those two in the face-off. You get Errol Spence's body attack against Fundora. Like, I just think that's a great style match. It was a fight I'd always loved to have seen before the Spence and Crawford fight, and they talked about Spence moving up. So yeah, is it the right fight? Maybe not. But I tell y'all one thing, I'd be very, very excited if we do get that fight. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And the last thing is that I know Tim Tszyu. What I want to see is even if Tim Tszyu doesn't get the rematch, if Fundora does vacate the title, and I think they would do this, but he's got to then fight for that vacant belt. I know right now I think Josh Kelly's number 1 and Erickson Lubin's number 2 at 154, the WBO. So Crawford would get the shot because he's activated his mandatory to move up, being the super champ. But Tim Tszyu should be his dance partner in that fight. No disrespect to Josh Kelly, but I think Tim Tszyu has been done wrong in this situation. And if a vacant WBO title does pop up, I hope that the next rankings, when they come out, Tim Tszyu is number 1, so he does get that shot.
Well, I mean, it goes back to what Dakota was saying, right? It's not just that, again, we say Crawford, in a move up, you'd be looking at Crawford because one, he is the champ, not just a champ. He's the champ. He's beaten everybody at the lower weight class. So if he has also earned the right to be able to move up and jump because he's the man, not only at 147, but he's the man pound for pound. So that would be the caveat there. Plus, again, you want to see Spence, whether it's at 147, 154, or 160, no matter where he fights next, you want to see him fight someone that isn't at the top because he got his ass whipped in his last fight. It wasn't a close decision loss. It wasn't a one-punch knockout early in the fight. He got thoroughly dominated and looked horrible, right? So you want to see him get a litmus test fight first before you get another opportunity to be the man in any division. In my mind, that's just my opinion.
Certainly fair. So we'll see how that all plays out. But let's move to the co-main event now. This was the fight that I was most excited for. I've always been on record as being a big Rolly Romero guy. Yeah, he ain't the most talented guy in the world, but he's the kind of character I think that boxing does need. He kind of the way he sells fights, and even though he plays a role and kind of a villain kind of role, he's still a very likable guy. Anybody who's met him, who I know has met him, is he's just the most outgoing person in a good way. A very thoughtful guy, just a very down to earth guy off the cameras and stuff like that. But boy, did he have his hands full with Cruz in there last Saturday night. You could tell from the first round on once Cruz landed that kind of left hook over the top. It's just his short, compact punches were going to be way too much for Rolly. I got to give Rolly credit because his heart did not fail him either. I mean, there were a lot of times where he was out on his feet in the first round and then also the seventh round before he got stopped in the eighth round where that dude would not go down. I've never seen a guy be out on his feet that much and never hit the canvas once before he got stopped. So give him all the credit in the world, even in a losing effort. Nibs, what were your thoughts on this fight? Because I know that you like Pitbull Cruz coming into this fight. You were proven right once again. So what were your thoughts on that one?
I mean, I hate to say I told you so, but I really don't. I love seeing it. But look, and I think Dakota's actually said this before. This is Rolly's defense to punches. He just leaves us. I mean, he pokes his chin out.
That's the problem,
bro. I'm not saying this to again. I said this on our last pod, and I said, look, people can talk all the shit about Rolly they want to. I do my fair share of it. But what you can't deny is the boy's got legitimate punching power on both his hands, and he's got heart. I'll give him that. He's got all the heart in the world. He even proved it against Tank when he did get knocked out. Before that, he's got some boxing ability. He's not a complete piece of shit, right? You don't become a two-division champion by just, well, okay, maybe you do. But you know what? He's a good fighter, not a great fighter. But against a guy like Pitbull, who's going to be just that, a Pitbull coming at you round after round in your face, he's going to be able to take whatever it is you're throwing at him because he's apparently got lead in his head. He's the opposite of Rolly. He's got a chin made of granite. And let's be really clear, Rolly does not. His chin is very questionable. Heart is there, but his chin is gone. Like he just can't take too many punches. He can't take what he's dishing out, and his boxing skills are average at best. So I don't ever, and maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't ever remember seeing a time where Rolly tucked his chin, like ever.
No, and I'm being honest, it's been a fundamental issue in his style really since we've seen him. And I think that there's other things that he brings to the table that are like people think maybe those can overshadow the fact that his chin is up in the air. But once you get to that certain level, like Tank, like Cruz, where you're in that top 10, top 5 kind of fights consistently, you got to bring something to the table for a guy like Cruz you're going to maintain your distance. You're going to be able to punch from the end of your punches. You're going to be able to get that respect. And you're going to be able to defend yourself if the guy closes distance. This was honestly the only way I could see the fight going, just because I felt like Cruz is going to have no problem closing distance, and Rolly's chin is going to be up in the air, and that's just kind of how it played out. That's something he's either going to fix or this is just who he is as a fighter, and he's going to be a fun character who's going to be in fun, exciting fights. But personally, I think Isaac Cruz is the star of the show in that one, and he's a guy who I think his day is coming. You know, when you're the only guy to have a close fight with Tank Davis, I feel like Isaac Cruz's time is coming at 140.
Speaking of
I
star,
mean,
I'm
it's
happy
hard to
you
bet
brought.
against him.
Hmm.
Sorry, it's just hard to bet against.
No, it is. And Isaac Cruz, people forget that he's only 25 years old too, so he's just kind of entering his prime now because we've seen him in big fights. We saw him fight Tank 2 years ago. He was only 23 then, so you'd think he's older than he is, but he's still kind of going up. And you mentioned star power, Dakota, too, and this is crazy. I was looking at PBC's just the YouTube, the highlights they have, and it kind of shows. And part of it was Rolly selling the fight. A lot of people, even people I know who don't really know boxing, they all know who Rolly is now from the Tank fight. They know who Isaac Cruz is from fighting Tank also. But just listen to some of these view counts. So we had Cormel Moten's fight got 371,000 views, the highlights. Boachuk Mendoza 90,000, Lara Zarafa 180,000, Tszyu Fundora 693,000, Rolly vs. Isaac Cruz 4 million views on YouTube. So it just shows that the audience that they have, it's a wide audience, and I think Isaac Cruz is well on. Even the thing that I had up here in the title is that is Isaac Cruz the next Mexican star, and I think he's well on his way to that, especially if he gets a Tank rematch or no matter what does happen next. So going forward to him next, you guys, well, what do you guys think is next for him? For me, I think that they do make the Tank Davis rematch at 140. I think for Tank, it's an easy way to he'll beat Frank Martin, then he could become a more legit three-division world champion now, going up against Isaac Cruz. He doesn't want to go to 140 to fight the bigger guys, but Isaac Cruz wouldn't really be a bigger guy than him at that weight. But tell you what, even though that's the most realistic one of my dream fights, and it goes back to that topic we had a few weeks ago, is if you could pick a certain fight. This wasn't a realistic one at that time, but man, imagine a fight between Subriel Matias and Isaac Cruz. I mean, just all action. I don't know if either one of them dudes could be hurt, but we would sure as hell find out on fight night. But Nibs, if you were in Isaac Cruz's corner, what would you kind of want to see next, and what do you think is going to be next for the Pitbull?
To be completely honest with you, I think that there's a risk in taking any of the other champs at 140 before you cash in, right? So the obvious choice would be to see if you can get Tank to run it back after the Frank Martin fight, because let's face it, that's the biggest money fight pretty much in boxing that doesn't include Canelo Alvarez, right? And that is not a heavyweight title fight. So unless you can metamorphose your body into the someone that could fight Canelo, you take Tank, and that's a realistic fight. Let's face it, Tank already beat him once, so he'd probably be licking his chops to come up and get a belt at 140, again, right? Against the guy he's already beat, smaller than him in stature, thicker than him, obviously. He's got, that boy's built like Pitbull is built like a Pitbull. Like, you know what I mean?
He's a mini David Tua, bro.
Right. Oh my, that's perfect, bro. Yeah. And the thing is, as hard as Rolly hits, Tank hits twice as hard as that. So that's what made it easier for him to win that fight, is because he does you have to respect that power. So Tank at 140 is even more dangerous to me. You know what I'm saying? I'd actually like to see Tank versus Teofimo. That's my, I want to see that. But if I were Isak's folks, I would either try to get in with Teofimo or Tank, because those are the bigger paydays.
I think that there's enough big names at 140 though that Cruz could very realistically beat, that I think strategically, like if I'm moving him, I feel like there's other big fights for him that could make a Tank rematch bigger. And I'm not looking to, if I'm a fighter or I'm managing a fighter or whatever, I'm not waiting on Tank Davis, bro. The kid doesn't fight enough to wait on him. So if he's got a fight scheduled now, then I'm not even thinking about him for another 15 months, because I don't know what his activity is going to be. So for Cruz, I want to see him. I think he beats Teofimo. I think he beats potentially the winner of the Catterall and Taylor rematch. I think that there are plenty of guys at 140 in that weight neighborhood. Ishmael Barroso, that's another really exciting fight. There's plenty of big fights for him to get big wins, where I think the fact that him and Tank's first fight was so close, he'll just have more leverage to make that fight as big as it can be.
Yo, could you
Shoot, I didn't
imagine
even
if
think
he
about
beat
I didn't even think
Teofimo?
about Barroso either. But Barroso is that's the dude who deserves a shot. I think he is
That's a
next in
hell of
line
a
for the
fight.
WBA. So if anyone should be next, it should be him. And shoot, sign me up for that fight too. Again, two guys who can still crack, Isaac Cruz and Barroso. Man, I ain't mad at that matchup. But that's what we see too.
Yo, could you imagine if Pitbull could actually beat Teofimo, get 2 belts?
I think he would beat Teofimo actually pretty easily, because Teo is not active enough to keep Cruz off of him, bro. He's not active enough, and he's not focused enough to box in a disciplined enough way to keep that kid off him for 12 rounds. I just don't see it. And I don't think that he's got the kind of pop that's going to worry him either. So I think it wouldn't be like this fight, but I don't think it would be that different from this fight.
I think if you're Pitbull and if you can pick up another belt somehow, whether it be Matias or Teofimo's, right? Then I'm not like you. Then that for me, that's when I would say, okay, well, I don't want Tank yet. I'm going to move on to Devin Haney, because then that would be the bigger fight in my mind, because you're fighting a guy who unified the division I just came from. And if I can get a fight with him, because I got 2 of the 4 belts, right? And unify with him, then you could say, hey, look, I'm really the dude. Then you could then you have way more power. And then you got 3 belts to be like, yeah, come on, bro. That would be ridiculous.
And also for him, he ain't the biggest 140 pounder. I think he kind of just more moved up for 140 because this opportunity presented itself. So even if he were to fight a Devin Haney and lose, he could always go back down to 35. And that Tank rematch is always going to be there too. So I see what you're saying on that. And you don't have to take it right away, because that's kind of always going to be there. See what else you can do at 140, and kind of always has that as a backup plan for you also.
And by the way, nobody's getting a Tank fight right away. That's the issue, right? If we know Tank is going to fight Frank Martin in June, I'm not even thinking about him until April of 2025. At the rate his career is moving, right? At that would be active for him if he came back in April of 2025 for him. So that's why if I'm Isaac Cruz, I just think with a win like this, you have a real opportunity to build a star separate from Tank Davis that could make that fight a genuine super fight.
Yeah, I mean, Tank says, and I don't know if it's him, but his people are saying he wants to fight again, at the end of this year. But we heard that song and dance last year, and we see how that went. Well, I mean,
right, and I'm not even making a statement like anything negative about Tank. It's just the reality of the amount of money behind him and the things in his personal life and the logistics that go into big fights like that. Like, I'm not saying he wouldn't want to fight 3 times a year if he had the choice. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. So, Dakota, I'll kind of let you take over this one, because this guy, he's my guy too, but he's definitely your guy. You made some posts about him being very underappreciated. So, Erislandy Lara, big knockout over Michael Zarafa. So, I kind of let you set the stage on not only what he did Saturday night, but also kind of just this run he's been on, even in the twilight of his career, and how he doesn't really kind of get the respect he deserves either.
Listen, I think longevity is a quality that doesn't get appreciated often enough in boxing. So it's like, even when guys lose, somebody like Nonito Donaire, who's able to stay relevant for almost 20 years, like, you have to have respect for that. And I was watching Erislandy Lara fights when I was in high school, and I'm in my 30s now. So I can't think of any fighter that was a young fighter and a prospect in 2007 that's still relevant today and arguably beat Canelo Alvarez, definitely beat Paul Williams. You very easily could have an argument that this guy's been undefeated, and he's been in with a who's who of his era. And you see him come out at 40 years old. He hasn't fought in 2 years, and you're like, well, what has he really got? And right from jump, it felt like if he's lost a step, I'd have to watch him for a while to notice it, because I'm not seeing it. And I know Zarafa is not a world beater, but he was a legitimate contender and the mandatory to the belt. You don't just wander your way there. So to me, to see a guy like Lara at 42 still able to get it done like that, bro, I mean, that's fucking impressive. And it's a part of it is because he's really only had 2 hard fights in his whole career where he took punishment. And people get mad about inactivity, myself included. Clearly, that has done something to preserve him because he hasn't spent the last 2 years in wars. He spent the last 2 years in the gym, and it's paying off, man. So shout out to Lara. I think he's maybe one of the, if not the most underrated fighter right now. And it was a great performance.
I mean, the Cuban dudes stay around for a while, bro. You know what I mean? And I think a part of that has to do with the fact that most of them aren't turning pro until they're in their 20s, right? Or later in their 20s, some of them even in their 30s. There's a difference between amateur punches and pro punches, right? So even though they've got long amateur careers, the fact that you can come into the pros, a little bit later, it allows you to stay a little bit later. You know what I mean? So I want to say that. And then I also want to say that he's a pro. He stays ready, right? What's the saying? You stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. Like he is ready at all times. And I don't think his inactivity has anything to do with his willingness to fight. I think, injuries, fights falling out, promotional shit, all the stuff that comes along with boxing.
PBC has not had dates for anybody since December. Right. So I don't know what the fuck happened with that Danny Garcia fight. I'm sure he would love to know what happened with that fight. So and God forbid any of these sanctioning bodies, do something to push fights. Nobody should be able to be inactive for 2 years and hang on to a belt. But it's also like if things are just not working out, at what point do you take it? It's a difficult position to be in. All we can hope now is that for however long he's going to be in the sport, that he can be in meaningful, lucrative fights. Because I think if anybody's earned it, it's him.
I think it would be different if he got offered a fight and turned it down, or if he was injured for a long period of time and wasn't even entertaining it. I think he was entertaining everything and it just wasn't going through. So again, I think because it didn't fall on him, right? I think that's the part a lot of people don't like to get into, right? They just want to see the fights and they automatically assume that if a fight didn't happen, the fighter had something to do with it. A lot of times fighters end up making their fights because nobody else wants to get it done, right? We see that the last couple of years. We've seen fighters be like, hey, shut the fuck up. Let me talk to this guy and we get it done, right? I think that's why he's been able to keep his belt as long as he has. But again, I just think it's how you carry yourself, bro. When you carry yourself as a professional, you treat everybody like a professional. People remember that shit, right? These sanctioning bodies probably love to deal with Arizona Landy Lara, right? Because they know what they're getting with him. They're getting a professional guy who's going to also not just carry their belt, but he's going to represent himself in their organization well when he gets out there. He's never made a fool of himself come fight night. I've never seen him, even in the fights that he's lost, everybody goes, oh, yeah, he's washed. Nah, to your point, right? Plus, I mean, when you got a beautiful wife like that at home, I mean, good Lord, somebody taking care of the brother. You know what I'm talking about? But look, he is going to go down for me, and this, I know I probably share this with everybody. First ballot, bro. First ballot.
Without a doubt, man. Without a doubt. And I think, like you said, even in his losses, bro, he just about ended Jarrett Hurd's career. Jarrett Hurd was never the same after that fight. And that was really the only real physical fight that Lara's had.
And Jarrett Hurd is how old?
About maybe close to a decade younger than Lara. The other thing that I think people forget is Lara spent a pretty decent amount of time trying to negotiate a fight with Triple G, who just didn't seem interested in getting back in the ring. So he wasted all that time trying to get Triple G to have a really cool old guy fight that we all would have enjoyed. And he wasn't interested. The Garcia fight falls through. PBC doesn't have dates. And there you go. 2 years of your career.
I don't blame Triple G because I don't know if he wants that Lara work at this point. Lara's a lot closer to his prime than Triple G is to his prime at this point. So it's how you know Lara's been around for a while. I mean, the dude is in the last Fight Night video game. Fight Night champion. He is on the roster in that game as like a mid-80s, like in his prime back then. So The dude's been around for a while. I'm still not even sure that he's not the best guy at middleweight. If you were to match up everybody at middleweight, I'm not sure I like him against Janabek. I'm not sure I wouldn't pick Lara to win that fight. Adames, all these other great guys we got at middleweight. If I had to put my money on one guy, even in his 40s, I think he's probably the best guy at middleweight. So, and that speaks to his longevity and why. You mentioned underrated guys like him and Guillermo Rigondeaux, without a doubt. Both Cuban southpaws, both similar styles, but are far and away the two most underrated guys of this generation. And as you guys mentioned, will definitely be first ballot Hall of Famers when all said and done.
And here's the thing: 10 years ago, we wouldn't even be having that discussion. 10 years ago, Laura washes those guys, right? The fact that you were still saying he could be in a competitive fight against everybody in the top 5, top 10, that tells you everything you need to know right there, bro.
I don't know if any of those guys have a style that's going to bother him. You think about the styles that have bothered him in his career, it's guys who are relentless, almost reckless power puncher or pressure fighters. Hurd's a reckless pressure fighter. He's going to take 5 to give 1. And the same goes for Angulo. Those guys were just able to do shit that's not reasonable in the ring that put pressure on Lara. Janabek, anybody that gives him any kind of thinking room or space to maneuver, they're gonna have a hard time, win, lose, or draw. And Janabek is kind of an arm's length guy. Adames is aggressive, but he's not reckless. So I don't even know if anybody at middleweight has the kind of style to really bother him.
I ain't been against Lara against those dudes. I know that, so I think he's the perfect. And then it shows that one, where the middleweight division is, and two, just how good he is at this age. Not many dudes in their 40s would be considered the best guy in the weight class. So just a few notes on the rest of the fights that happened on this card. Julio Cesar Martinez. We're not going to get into this fight. He won a weird fight in this Julio Cesar Martinez classic fashion. Carmel Moten was on the undercard. I really like what I see from Carmel Moten, but I want to give this fight some credit. We said we thought it should have been on the pay-per-view. But Sergey Boachuk against Brian Mendoza. Boachuk was kind of the big loser just because he had a title fight and then he lost his title fight. Then we thought he was getting a tougher matchup against Mendoza, but man, Brian Mendoza's a tough dude to kind of beat up on, but Boachuk really beat up on him. Boachuk's clearly a hard-handed guy, a heavy hitter, just more thudding power than anything, and he really kind of down Mendoza. But Mendoza doing the classic Mendoza thing. I mean, you're never gonna put that guy out no matter what. We'll probably never see that dude get stopped, even if he fights into his 50s. Just the heart of a champion too, even if he's not a champion. But I wanted to give both those guys props, and if you guys had anything to touch on for that fight, because I think Boachuk now throws his name in the mix for the winner of the main event for any of these guys up at 154. He showed he's at least a top 10 guy right now too, for sure. That's a very impressive victory.
Yo, you gotta put Boachuk in the mix after a performance like that, bro. I'm very impressed, not just with clearly he hits really scary hard, because just to be able to bully Mendoza in certain rounds like that, you gotta have special little bricks in your hands, bro. And I was impressed. That's not the same guy that got stopped by Brandon Adams a couple years ago. He's really upped his game a little bit. And for Mendoza, fighting a big physical power puncher like that, he really boxed well for a lot of the fight. And there was just the majority of the middle rounds, the pressure started to build up. But in classic Mendoza fashion, the last 3 rounds, he arguably won the last 3 rounds in a fight that he kind of got beat up in. So he's always in the mix. He spent the whole camp with Tim Tszyu. Who would have thought those guys were going to go 0-2 on this card? But both of them, I think, show that, they're still players in the division. I don't think any differently of Mendoza after that. If anything, I just think way higher of Boachuk.
You know what Brian Mendoza kind of reminds me of? A more skilled Arturo Gatti. Like, he's a guy who's going to give, no matter where in the fight he is, whether he's getting completely dominated as we saw against Fundora, or if he's cruising, he's going to give you 110 every round, right? So it doesn't matter how the fight's going, you're getting the same version of him, and he's never out of a fight. Even if he gets knocked down and looks bad, he's not the guy you wave off after he's been knocked down hard. He's the guy you let him get up, you give him his 8, wipe his gloves off, and send him back in there because he's got a chance, right? So that's what you know, who doesn't love that kind of guy, right? A guy who's going to give you 110% no matter whether he's outmatched or not. And then he can still win a fight. He can go in there against somebody who's got more natural talent than he has in his whole body in their little pinky and still has a chance because of the heart he has. He's got some skills and he's got sneaky power. So you love a guy like that who's got more balls than brains, but can get in there and do it. So, you know, sign me up for his fights, bro. Like, you know, win, lose, or draw. He's a fun watch.
All the credit in the world to Mendoza and to Boachuk, who made himself a real contender. Shout out to Hybrid in the building, too. As always, that Lara has had the sickest 1-2 in the game. And he's showing that 1-2. Ask Michael Zarafa about that 1-2. That 1-2 still got some sting on it now. So, without a doubt, it's good to see Lara back in action. But we'll kind of speed around and go through these next few. These are from Friday night. But Sinise Estrada, Yoka Valle, I know that they were the co-main event, but we're going to address them as the main event because that's what they should have been. And they showed out like they were the main event. So Nibs, I'll kind of go to you first. What were your thoughts on Sinise Estrada, even what Yoka Valle brought to the table in a loss, and kind of where Sinise Estrada now stands currently and all time with this undisputed championship?
To be honest with you, I think if they'd have had a 12-round fight, Sinise might have been in some problems, bro, because I felt like Valle was coming on at the end. Like she was getting her shit together. Like it wasn't like, you know, I felt like Sinise was kind of, I wouldn't say dominating, but she was winning rounds a little bit easier. But then Valle comes back around and I'm like, yo, bro, this might be closer than people think. And it was just a good ass fight. Like they were both just winging punches, throwing punches. The I don't know if it's real hatred, but the dislike for each other is real. Like these girls really don't like each other, and they were in there throwing until till it was over. So it was the main event, bro. Let's be real clear. That was the best fight on the card. It proved itself. You know, we talked about this before. The loser doesn't lose much. Like the loser gains in this. You know what I mean? If at the end of that fight, if you have both of those girls in your top 5 pound for pound in the women's side, I'm not arguing with you at all.
This was also one of those fights too, man, that it's not every women's fight, but at a certain level, it's like the 10 2-minute rounds becomes like a real detriment to the fight. You know, at a minimum, this fight needed 12 rounds. Even if they're 2 minutes, this fight needed 12 rounds. 3 10-minute rounds, something. I got to see more of them two in the ring than what a regular men's 8-rounder would be. Because that's what we're saying. For it, a men's 8-rounder is more ring time than a women's title fight. That shit is silly, bro. Especially as the sport develops. These are two of the best boxers in the world. Sinise Estrada is one of the best boxers on the planet. And so when a title fight like that goes so fast, it's like it leaves so much to be desired. You know what I mean?
And one thing I think is that even though I thought it was a clear win, a competitive fight. I thought Sinise won probably about 7-3. If you say 6-4,
That's
I ain't
how I
mad at
had it.
that. I ain't mad at that either. But I do think we probably see a rematch of this fight at some point. Obviously, it was a great fight, but also because there's not many other options, especially at 105. I mean, there's no one else who I think would give either one as a challenge. Yeah, you could move up and fight a Gabriela Fundora, even move up to fight a Spars or again something like that. But I think that a rematch for this fight, maybe not right this second. Maybe Sinise does move up and then they go back to it. But I think that this, you can kind of sell this rematch against her because Yoka was coming on. I did give her the last round, but I wanted to put this in because it was funny with Yoka's trainer at the end. And I got all the respect for everyone kind of backing their fighter, but she was saying how they thought they won the fight or whatever, and she didn't understand what Mark Kriegel was saying, which found this kind of funny. I think he said, what did he say that he gave? I forget it. I don't know. I forget now. I'm trying to think about what exactly he said, but he was like explaining the scorecards that he had. He gave Sinise 4 rounds or something, or 6 rounds or something like that. And then she said like, what about the other 4 or something like that? And it's like, yeah, even if you got the other 4, it's still not enough. So the math wasn't math, and I forget exactly how it was. But that was funny. Yeah, all the respect to the trainer.
He
You
said he
get
had her winning by 4,
that's
and
what
she
it
said,
was.
"Well, what about the other 6?" And he's
Hmm.
like, "Well, that's it. I had her winning
There we
6
go.
rounds before." Yeah.
Yeah. Good stepping in for me because my math wasn't math on that either. So I appreciate you having my back on that one. I was like, this ain't exactly how it was, but I'm gonna let it go regardless. So.
But this was I think the fact that the 10 2-minute rounds, that it wasn't the main event. I mean, this is like a career defining win for Sinise Estrada to really beat, this was her Chocolatito Estrada. This was her, this was her Bam Rodriguez and Sonny Edwards. This was a career defining moment. And she boxed just incredibly. She was doing the fucking the Toro at the end. It was a fantastic performance, man, and I don't think it got the shine exactly that it deserved, unfortunately. But that's why we're giving her flowers now.
100%.
I
That's
will
why I
say
think a
she did
rematch
get.
would be a cool idea, being the rematch in the main event also.
I say this: she got caught clean more than I would have liked. But you got to give that again to credit to the opponent, right?
I
Like,
think Vaya is just a great fighter too, and she wasn't going to show up and not execute a game plan. You know what I mean?
yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think if I had hit just a little bit harder, Sinise might have been in some real trouble. But again, that's what gave us the good fight. It's when Vaya did land, she was landing clean. Sinise made her miss when she made her miss. If she made it look silly, but it was high level shit. And no disrespect to the main event because it was a good fight too. But this was the best fight on the card, bro. From in my opinion.
So, yeah. Now to go over to that quote unquote main event, as Nibs called it, I want to give Oscar Valdez some credit because your boy, he's got the shirt on now. He did put him on dog watch last week. Now, not that he was watching because he was about to go back in the ring in a little bit, but when I put you on dog watch, it's because, first of all, I do it for big fights. So you're a big fighter, and it's also normally fighters I'm fans of too, but it's not even to slight you, it's just to kind of give you a little bit of motivation. So I think that's exactly the way. When you get put on dog watch, don't pout, don't ask why you're on, ask questions about it. Do what Oscar Valdez did and kind of figure out and show me that, okay, you better put me on dog watch now, but don't put me on dog watch again. And I hear you, Oscar Valdez. I'll probably keep you off dog watch for the rest of the year, but hell of a performance against Liam Wilson. We've seen Wilson against Navarrete showed he was game. Liam Wilson showed he was game in this fight too, but I'll go to you, Dakota, first in this one. What'd you think about Oscar Valdez? Because there's a lot of questions about what he had left, but I think he showed that he's got more than enough left in the tank, and he could be in some unifications or big fights going forward also.
Well, I think he was completely dominant in this fight. He boxed in the way that he needed to, and he can still sit down and let a fast combination go. And he just showed that he was a level above Liam Wilson in this fight, which is impressive. Obviously, because Wilson gave Navarrete so much trouble, but also because 2 out of 3 of Valdez's last fights are losses to Navarrete and Shakur Stevenson, which, even though that's the top of the sport, just mentally how that might weigh on you, that like, man, I'm right there, and I'm coming up short. I get to the very top of the sport where I could be in the pound for pound conversation and I'm falling short. So you don't know how people react in that moment. And he comes out after those fights and after a very physical career and now being in his mid 30s and boxes a fight like that. He's right back in the mix, and I'm ready to see him in with Shock Foster. I'm ready for Luis Alberto Lopez. I'm ready for anybody. He's right back in the mix for me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was ever. I don't know. I don't think I ever questioned how he was going to come out because I think Oscar Valdez is again. And I hate saying this because it gets overused. He's built differently. Like this dude, you know what I mean? He's legitimately does have the Warriors mentality. He's the guy that's going to die on his shield every time he comes out there. If he's going to lose, he's going to lose in the ring. He's not going to let don't throw in the towel on him, right? Let him go out there and do it his way. But he's also a very highly skilled boxer, and he reminds people, hey, look, I can still put a guy away, right? I can put a guy who gave Navarrete, all the fits he could handle, and most people thought he actually should have won that fight. I'm going to get rid of this dude. I want to say this about Liam, right? That dude could probably beat everybody else in the division. There are 3 names he can't touch. Everybody else probably has a hell of a time, if not gets washed by him. Valdez is different, bro. And he proved it. He proved why he is who he is, why he's gotten all the praise and we put him up there and the esteem that we give him, he proved it. He's like, hey, I've earned this. So, whatever he does next, by the way, blank check it for me. I'm good with it.
So I think what we will see next is he's the interim WBO champ. I think Navarrete, with moving up, he's going to vacate that title. So sign me up for Dakota already mentioned it, but a unification between O'Shaquie Foster and Oscar Valdez. I think that's a great fight. And then I even got a fight for Liam Wilson. So he just came up short in the title fight. I know somebody personally who just came up short, maybe a little just shorter in the title fight. He was right there, but my guy Abraham Nova, I think that him and Liam Wilson would be a fantastic fight. So Valdez and Foster, maybe the co-main event as Nova and Wilson. Man, sign me up for that summertime
No,
at some
and
point this year.
don't sleep on my guy Hobson Conceição, bro. That's a guy who deserves a big fight ASAP. That actually, Nova and Conceição is the fight that I want.
Hey, give me that fight too.
Yo, I'll take all three of them. Shit. You know what I mean? Can we do a tag team or something like that? Put them all three in that motherfucker. Let them go at it. You know what, though? I think you mentioned those three names, right? I think if you put them in against anybody, it's going to be entertaining. You know what I mean? In my opinion, all three of those guys. So I like it, but I think that you're right, Jack. I think if whatever Valdez is, again, I said it before, whatever Valdez's next move is, I'm cool with it because I think he's earned his right to do whatever the fuck he wants next. But I do think that him and Shaq, like, oh my God, bro.
Well, him and Joe Cordino would be a great fight too, and it would be an opportunity for Valdez to get a title,
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I'm with it.
Lamont Roach is still lurking in
Lamont Roach
somewhere too. It would be a fantastic.
130 is a good weight class right now, bro. 130 is sneaky good weight class right now.
No, yeah, Lamont Roach don't want that smoke, bro. He don't want that smoke. I mean, he shouldn't. He might, but he shouldn't.
Yeah, I think he's in the mix. He's in the mix.
I'm not sure about that. I give him a good shot against Valdez. I'm telling you.
Lamont Roach fights Valdez next. He getting okay. Y'all can say that if you want.
I'm not picking a winner on that fight. I would lean Valdez. I'm just saying he's in the mix, and it would be an opportunity for Valdez to get a world title at 130.
That would be a great fight. I'd be interested to see it if we could see it. But real quick, we'll just touch on these. But two fights that we have for this weekend. We have actually real quick before that. We'll do that after. But I'm gonna throw these guys some love because it was on Easter Sunday, so it didn't get a lot of credit over here. It was on Peacock, so it was hard for people to kind of watch. But man, Frazier Clark and Fabio Wardley. Some bad blood in that fight. A UK match for the British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles. But we talk about fights when even Nibs mentioned it too, where the loser stays the same or goes up. As far as I'm concerned, these two dudes' stocks both went up in this fight. It was a hell of a fight. It ended up being a split draw. We saw Frazier Clark dropped at one point, and then he ended up rallying back. At some point, it seemed like the skills and the jab was going to be way too much for Fabio Wardley to deal with. But man, those two dudes both answered a lot of questions. They both overcame adversity, crazy ebbs and flows, momentum shifts, just everything that you want to see in a fight. So I want to just give both those dudes credit, and whether it's a rematch or maybe we throw those guys in the mix with a Daniel Dubois, a Joe Joyce, anyone in that UK scene, a Dillian White, I want to see those two dudes fight again. I always liked Fabio Wardley, and Frazier Clark's really starting to grow on me too. All the credit in the world for those guys. It was a hell of a fight. Even if it didn't get much attention, I wanted to just give it attention on here real quick.
That was a great fucking heavyweight fight, and we've been waiting to. I think the question with Wardley is like he has some of the athleticism and the power and the explosiveness, but like, can he hang in with a guy at a certain skill level at a certain size? I feel like Clark kind of brought all of those things to the table. Maybe not the height, but he's a real heavyweight and he's a skilled heavyweight. I think. He was able to drop Clark. There was the point deduction. I think in terms of skills, he's still a little short, right? Like I felt like Clark won the skills battle, but he still makes up for that with punching power, with being explosive, with these bursts of combinations that he has. So there's a lot to work on for both guys, but I feel like they both proved that they're right on the cusp, and if anything, are just some of the, in my opinion, two of the more exciting heavyweight prospects.
We're going to get to this in a few minutes because Nibs always does our thing, but this is why you support every fighter even on the way up, because everybody has different avenues. You had two guys that fought to a split draw. Fraser Clark was a superstar amateur, an Olympic medalist, and has a certain pedigree behind him. Fabio Wardley just a few years ago was fighting in white collar boxing and found his way to now then fight on a few local shows, some club shows, and now has stepped up to the point where they are now at the same level in the pro game. So that just speaks to Nib's point as always of you want to support these guys from the bottom coming up because some guys' trajectories they start at different points, they have different ebbs and flows, but at some point once you get to the top, it's always kind of rewarding to see the story. And Fabio Wardley went from a white collar guy to box and almost beat an Olympic medalist. And I think that speaks everything you want to see and everything you love to see about the sport of boxing.
You already know what I'm going to say.
We already know what he's going to say, so he don't even need to say it. He's going to save it for a few minutes from now. But that was a great fight. I'm really excited to see what both those dudes do next. Whatever it is, I'm here for it. So really, 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 really quick, we're going to now go over the fights that we got for this weekend. Richardson Hitchins against Gustavo Lemos. I'm excited for this fight because Lemos is a guy who he's earned the spot. He was a mandatory at 135. I think he might have missed weight or whatever, so he moves up and becomes a mandatory at 140. So I'm not really sure about that. If those are the exact details, he gets then rewarded for that. But hey, he beat Lee Selby, so I think that's what put him in this position. But Richardson Hitchins is someone who I've always been high on, so I'm really interested to see how this fight plays out. I want to see how he deals with a tough, rugged, durable guy in Lemos who's undefeated and who's in his prime. Can he give answer some questions about Hitchens and maybe Jose Cepeda wasn't able to, but at the end of the day, I think Richardson Hitchens could beat any of these guys at 140. Maybe he's not the favorite against any of those guys, but he's very skilled. It's also just the sharpness of his punches. He's not a huge puncher, but he's a sharp puncher, and that can still get your respect too. So I'm really interested to see how this fight plays out. So I'll go to this one to you first, Dakota. What are your thoughts on Richardson Hitchens and Gustavo Lemos for tomorrow night?
I'm real high on Hitchens right now. I was in person when he fought. I believe it was John Bauza. Is that right, Jack? Is that the guy he beat at the Garden? Yeah,
That's a good fighter right there too. That was an undefeated versus undefeated matchup.
That was the one that really sold me because I had seen Bauza a couple of times prior to that and was impressed with him. And I leaned Hitchens, but I thought, all right, this is a good competitive fight. You know, big ups to two youngins with unbeaten records that are trying to get after it. And Hitchens dominated that fight. You know, he essentially dominated Jose Cepeda. I think that he's winning the kinds of fights in the way that I'm just seeing the progression. And I think that he's a player at 140. I don't know what kind of questions this fight's going to answer, but I'm glad he's staying active against good opposition.
Nibs, you got any thoughts on Richardson Hitchens and Gustavo Lemos for tomorrow night?
Richardson's going to win. He's fighting a regular dude. If I'm, I'd love to be able to say a whole bunch of stuff about his opponent that's really shining and all that other good stuff. But there's levels to this game. We talk about this shit all the time. We overuse it, whatever. Excuse me. I think until Hitchens gets basically up until the top 5, I'm not really worried about anybody he's fighting. You know what I mean? I think he's going to make this regular guy look really regular. He's going to do what he does. He's going to look great doing it, and he's going to get a payday, hopefully soon.
One good thing about that is I do think it will come soon. This is an IBF eliminator, so the winner of this fight should become the mandatory for Subriel Matias. Talk about a styles clash. I'd like to see how Matias deals with Richardson Hitchens and how Richardson Hitchens deals with Matias. We'd be able to answer a lot of questions about both those guys, but the co-main event on this card is a very, very interesting fight too. We got another undefeated versus undefeated matchup. We got Diego Pacheco against Sean McCalman. Now, McCalman hasn't been in with the level of opposition that Pacheco has. Pacheco's somebody who people look at as future world champion, future superstar. So McCalman is up against it, but he's undefeated, so you never kind of know how that's going to play out. So, Dakota, what do you expect from Diego Pacheco in this fight? He's coming off some big wins over Jack Cullen and against Coceras. He's in a 12-round fight here. WBC USA super middleweight title, so moving closer to kind of becoming a mandatory at some point. So what are your thoughts on Diego Pacheco?
I think, he's one of the best prospects, if not young contenders at super middleweight. He's kind of been in the shadow of David Morrell, who's just been so destructive and explosive to watch. But he's a little younger than David Morrell, and I think that he probably, I don't know exactly, but I'm guessing he didn't have as long of an amateur career as Morrell. And we're really seeing him develop as a pro. I thought he looked great against Caceres, and it was the first time we saw him get tagged a little bit, and I liked how he adjusted and responded. Similar situation as Hitchins, where again, I don't know what questions this fight answers. I personally think that Pacheco is ready to fight a top 20, top 15 guy. Carlos Gongora, someone in that general area. And I think he's a fantastic fighter, bro. Just really well-rounded. I'm looking forward to seeing him.
I mean, you say that Gongora fight. I really like that fight too. Gongora's kind of been out and active a little bit, but man, it's the perfect kind of fight. You see how he deals with a southpaw who can really, really crack, who can box too. Man, I really love that fight. That would be the perfect kind of fight that I would want to see. Nibs, now none of us know much about the opponent, but do you have any thoughts on Diego Pacheco and kind of maybe what you want to see for him in this fight and then also going forward too?
Bro, I think he's got the perfect combination of everything you want a boxer to have, right? Size, speed, power, and ring IQ, right? Very rarely do you see somebody get all of them, right? So I think pretty much, and I've said this a lot, as long as he doesn't beat himself, he's going to be able to go wherever he wants to go. As long as his team moves him correctly, as long as he doesn't fall in love with the things that he already does well, and he doesn't beat himself, I think this kid can pretty much go wherever he wants. I'm not picking against him until he gives me a reason not to.
No, that's a fact. So that is some other good undercard fights on there. I know Mark Castro's on the undercard. We got Sky Nicholson. We got Galal Yafai. So kind of a bye weekend boxing, but still some good little fights in for that. But one thing I want to mention before I let Nibs kind of wrap things up is I was fortunate enough to train alongside the Boston Butchers last weekend in the Team Combat League, and they have their first match coming up on Thursday. And there's some really good names in there. So I'm going to give you guys some of the matchups that we got here. But even on the Boston side, we got some great fighters. So, and they're going to be going against, I believe this is the DC team. Just some of the matchups we've got. You have Francis Hogan against Alantez Fox. You have Speedy Rashidi Ellis against Demetrius Ballard. You have James Perella against Michael Fox. You have Thomas O'Toole against Nasheed Smith. Shelly Vincent against Jamie Mitchell. Alejandro Paulino's in there too. So a lot of really, really good fighters. I got to see them all spar. They were sparring, just trying to get the one round format down. So you got a lot of big names in there too. So I know they're looking to make it's their first year in it. The DC team was in it last year. So some big names in there. I believe that is on. You can go to the Boston Butchers Instagram page, Facebook page, or Team Combat League to see details on how to stream those fights. But if you're a boxing fan, I would definitely look to tune in on next Thursday night because the one round format's pretty interesting and got some high level talent in there too. So it should be a good show. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there also. And if you guys have any thoughts on that, feel free to let it know.
Jack, can you quickly explain the format of how these fights work, and are these going to be fights that are on all these guys' records?
Yeah, so it's on BoxRec, but it's on a different tab. It's under the Team Combat League, so it doesn't count on their pro record because they're all only fighting one round each, which kind of makes it fascinating. You look at a guy like Rashidi Ellis and think with his hand speed, he's kind of built for something like this. So it's interesting to see how someone deals with someone like him. But they each fight one round, so there's a bunch of different weight classes. You go from I think 126 to heavyweight, and there's 24 rounds in total. So you have each person. There's 16 different people on each side. You each fight one round. So it's the first 8 go, then the second 8 go, and then the third round is called the money round. I think it's just random matchups on both sides. So you'll have these two guys go again, these two ladies go again. It kind of goes that way. So it's interesting when I listen to the coaches kind of explain to the guys because they got to kind of get used to 8 guys will all walk out together. So then they got to get used to warming up on the fly and being ready to go. Okay, one round. All right, now you're in, and then a round, then you're ready to go. So it's interesting. It's going to be a learning experience for these guys, even the first time around. But I'm still new to it too. I'm still interested to see kind of how it plays out, to see how they do with it on Thursday night, and then also going forward in the next bunch of events that they're going to have too.
It's a cool format. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm already confused.
Don't worry, I
I
am
am a
too.
little
Hey,
bit too, but yeah, I think that's a good reason to watch, right? Is it's like I think that we're putting together a new style of combat sports that could potentially be interesting.
yeah. Hey, it's all good, Nibs, because I had the coaches explaining it right in front of me, and I still kind of, even as I'm saying, I'm like, is that exactly how it goes? So either way, tune in Thursday night. They're gonna know how it goes, and they're gonna be able to figure out the best that they can. But we're about wrapped up on this one. I know I've been watching the Final Four, more the women's side even than the men's side for this March Madness. I got UConn and Iowa. I want to see some Paige Beckers and Caitlin Clark. Before all that, Nibs is kind of, we know we're going to let Nibs kind of do his thing. We already talked about, even for me, the local side of with the Boston Butchers, being around some of those guys and watching them on the club shows. Francis Hogan and Thomas O'Toole, I got to see fight last year. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do in this one round format and also how they do going forward. So, Nibs, floor is yours. I don't even need to say anything else. I'm going to just let you do your thing.
Appreciate you, fellas. Again, another lovely show. I always, love working with you guys. I want to lead the segment off this time by a quote by a guy who was famously supported by his local area. It's a quote that says, "A champion doesn't become a champion in the ring. He's merely recognized in the ring. His becoming happens during his daily routine." That comes from the infamous Joe Louis. If anybody knows anything about boxing, you've heard the name Joe Louis a million times, right? It's Joe Louis and boxing go together like peanut butter and jelly. It just is what it is. And Joe Louis wouldn't be who he was to the sport if his community, and I don't just mean the community he was born into or the community he was raised in, an entire section of the country supported this dude, right? But early on in his career, people in the whole Midwest where he was raised came and supported him. And this was at a time when people didn't have money to throw at, going to sporting events. They did it anyway. They supported their guy. He became larger than life. This is a story that happens a lot throughout boxing. But again, we're in an age now where people just want to sit at home and watch the guys on TV. You got to get out there. You have to support these local guys because there's another Joe Louis out there. There's another Muhammad Ali, formerly known as Cassius Clay, right? There's another. We just talked about him, a little bit earlier. Arturo Gotti and Ward. There's another one of those guys in your community that we don't even know about yet that needs your support to become who they are going to become. And sometimes that lack of support, that lack of continuity, that lack of people going, oh, well, I'm going to go out to these events, leads these guys to doing something else, right? Whether it's just getting jobs at the grocery store, becoming construction workers, getting into some stuff we can't talk about without getting demonetized, all that kind of stuff, right? Support your local guys. They can become the Joe Lewis's of the day because, like he said, it's not what you see in the ring. It's what happens before that makes these guys who they are. So they need you more then than they ever will when the ring comes. Support local boxing, baby.
It's a fact. Couldn't have said it any better, and that's why I don't say it. That's why I leave it to Nibs. But you guys both do great work on the separate platforms. Is there anything you guys want to shout out for Dakota? You want Slip and Weave or Nibs on Sound About Right that you guys are going to be doing going forward that the people should be looking at, be on the lookout for?
I have some more episodes coming out soon. I don't have exact dates, but there's more episodes of Slip Away Podcast coming. So stay tuned. Follow me on Instagram, on YouTube, Slip Away Podcast. Support local boxing.
There it is. And you know what? The sounds about right, guys. We're taking another little bit of a break because we got the draft coming up. So we've been covering football lately. So I got an episode that I'm actually going to put out a little bit closer to the draft because it all kind of ties into that. And then we're going to get back on when the draft happens. My team, we got the number 1 and the number 9 slots. So we're going to be making some big moves. You'll be hearing a lot about us. Fuck with us, on Sounds About Right. Catch and counter, slip and weave, baby. ITR. Get it.
That's a fact that we were speaking earlier, but the Bears are playoff bound this year. You might not believe it now, but you guys are gonna believe it come football season. I guarantee y'all. So they've been chefing up making some good moves and stuff. I'm excited to see how it plays out. That's it for the Kobe episode 24 of Catch and Connor. Catch the boxing shop on Monday. Catch us back. We should be back next Friday.